At our engagement party, my mom told my fiancé I wasn't enough and pitched my golden brother as the better choice. One calm question exposed his fake life and quietly shattered the family's favorite illusion. I, 29 male, work as a software engineer at a pretty successful tech company in Seattle. Nothing flashy, but I make good money, own my apartment outright, and I've been with my company for 6 years now. I started as a junior developer and worked my way up to senior engineer, leading a team of 5 people. I've always been the responsible one, the steady one, the son who never caused drama or asked for anything. My brother Brad is 31, 2 years older, and he's always been the golden child. Always. Since we were kids, everything revolved around Brad. When he played Little League, the whole family showed up with custom t-shirts and foam fingers. They'd cheer so loudly that other parents would stare. When I played saxophone in the school band, Mom would complain about having to sit through concerts, checking her watch every 5 minutes and sighing dramatically during my solos. Brad got a brand new Honda Civic for his 16th birthday, complete with a big red bow in the driveway and a surprise party with all his friends. When I turned 17 and asked if I could get a used car to drive to my part-time job, I got a lecture about responsibility, the value of hard work, and how I should be grateful for the family car that I could borrow sometimes if I asked nicely and Brad wasn't using it. The pattern continued into adulthood, getting worse as the years went on. Brad went to college on Mom and Dad's dime, changed majors 3 times, took 6 years to graduate with a communications degree, and they called it finding himself and exploring his passions. They were so proud when he finally graduated that they threw another party, inviting everyone they knew to celebrate their son's achievement. When I got a full scholarship to study computer science and graduated summa cum laude in 4 years with multiple job offers, they barely acknowledged it. No party, no celebration, just a card from Mom that said, "Congratulations. We always knew you'd do well in school." That was it. No recognition of the fact that I'd earned a full ride, no pride in my academic achievements, no excitement about my future prospects. Brad moved back home after college and stayed there for 4 years while figuring out his next move. During that time, he went through phases. First, he was going to be a YouTube star, spending Dad's money on expensive camera equipment and editing software that gathered dust after 2 weeks. Then, he was going to flip houses despite having 0 experience in construction or real estate. Then, it was cryptocurrency trading. Then, a food truck business, then life coaching, then affiliate marketing. Each new venture was announced with great fanfare. Mom and Dad would gather the extended family to hear Brad's latest business plan, nodding enthusiastically as he explained how this time was going to be different, how this time he was going to make it big. They'd invest money they couldn't really afford to lose. And when each venture inevitably failed, they'd comfort Brad and assure him that he was just ahead of his time, too creative for conventional business models. Meanwhile, I moved out at 22 and never looked back. I rented a studio apartment, worked overtime to afford furniture, learned to cook by watching YouTube videos, and slowly built a life for myself. I got promoted twice in my first 3 years, bought a reliable used car, started a retirement fund, went to therapy to deal with family issues, actual adult stuff. But none of that mattered when Brad walked into a room with one of his grand stories about his latest business venture or creative project. Suddenly, I was invisible again, the boring son with the boring job and the boring life. Here's the thing about Brad that nobody in my family wants to acknowledge. He's a complete mess, always has been, always will be. He's never held a job for longer than 18 months. He's racked up massive credit card debt that he hides from our parents, and he's borrowed money from every family member multiple times without paying it back. I personally lent him $3,000 over the years, always with promises to pay me back next month that never materialized. He's charming. I'll give him that. He can walk into a room and within 10 minutes have everyone laughing at his stories, nodding at his ideas, opening their wallets to support his dreams. He's mastered the art of making people feel like they're part of something special, something exclusive. But underneath all that charm is someone who's never taken responsibility for anything in his life. The worst part is how my parents enable him. Every time he gets fired, it's because his boss didn't appreciate his creativity or his innovative ideas. Every time he gets evicted, it's because landlords are greedy and don't understand artistic temperaments. Every time he asks for money, it's just until he gets back on his feet, just until this next opportunity pays off. They've been saying he's about to turn his life around for literally a decade. I stopped believing in Brad's potential around the time he got fired from his job at a coffee shop for showing up high 3 days in a row. He spun it to our parents as being let go because he suggested improvements to their business model that threatened management. They bought it completely. About 8 months ago, I met Sarah through a mutual friend at this tech meetup downtown. She's a UX designer, 27 years old, smart as hell, funny, and honestly way out of my league in every possible way. She has this incredible ability to look at complex problems and find elegant, simple solutions. She's also beautiful, which didn't hurt. But what really got me was how engaged she was in the conversation. We started talking about this terrible app we both had to use for work, complaining about the interface design and the user experience. She made me laugh so hard talking about the app's navigation system that I almost spilled coffee all over my laptop. When she started sketching out improvements on a napkin, I knew I was in trouble. I asked her out that same night, fully expecting her to politely decline. To my amazement, she said yes. Dating Sarah has been incredible. She gets my weird sense of humor, especially my tendency to make programming jokes that most people find incomprehensible. She's supportive of my career, actually listens when I talk about work stuff that most people find boring, and she has her own ambitions and projects that she's passionate about. She's working on this app to help people with anxiety manage their daily routines, and the way she talks about user empathy and design thinking is genuinely inspiring. We moved in together after 5 months, which I know sounds fast, but when you know, you know. My apartment had better space for her home office setup, and she practically lived there already. She makes me want to be a better version of myself. Not because she asked me to change, but because being with her makes me see possibilities I never considered before. She encouraged me to apply for a leadership position at work that I didn't think I was ready for. She supported me through the interview process, helped me prepare presentations, and celebrated with me when I got the promotion. She's the first person in my life who sees my potential and believes in my ability to achieve it. 3 weeks ago, I proposed. Nothing fancy, just us at home on a Sunday morning making pancakes and talking about our future. We were discussing this house we'd seen online, debating whether we could afford the mortgage, planning imaginary renovations, when I realized I wanted to have these conversations with her for the rest of my life. I'd been carrying the ring around for a month, waiting for the perfect moment. I had planned elaborate scenarios: sunset dinner at a fancy restaurant, weekend getaway to the mountains during a walk through her favorite park. But sitting there in our kitchen, flour in her hair from making pancakes, talking about our shared dreams, I suddenly realized the perfect moment was just being with her. I got down on one knee right there between the stove and the kitchen island. She said yes before I even finished asking the question, then cried and laughed at the same time while syrup burned on the stove behind us. It was perfect in the most imperfect way possible. We've been planning our engagement party ever since, and that's where everything went wrong. The engagement party was supposed to be small, just immediate family and close friends. Sarah was nervous about meeting my parents officially. She'd heard some of my family stories over the months we'd been dating, and she was worried they wouldn't like her. She spent hours picking out the perfect dress, asked me multiple times what topics of conversation would be safe, and practiced stories about her work and her family. I kept reassuring her that they'd love her, that they just needed to get to know her, that once they saw how happy she made me, they'd be supportive. I believed that too. I really thought that once they saw how good we were together, how much we complemented each other, they'd welcome her into the family with open arms. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs in the weeks leading up to the party. Mom kept asking weird questions about Sarah's background, her family's financial situation, whether she came from good stock. She wanted to know about Sarah's parents' careers, whether they owned their home, what kind of neighborhood Sarah grew up in. At the time, I thought she was just being thorough, wanting to know about the woman who would be joining our family. The party was at my parents' house, which is this suburban McMansion that they bought during Brad's senior year of high school. It's got marble countertops, a 2-story foyer, and a kitchen that's been featured in the local Home and Garden magazine. Mom loves hosting things because it gives her an excuse to show off their renovations and talk about their wine collection, which she's been building since she took a sommelier course 3 years ago. She'd been planning the menu for weeks, asking me about Sarah's dietary restrictions, what kind of flowers she liked, whether she preferred white wine or red. She seemed genuinely excited about the party, about meeting Sarah properly, about celebrating our engagement. I thought all the preparation was a good sign. I should have seen the warning signs when we walked in. Mom hugged Sarah a little too long, like she was sizing her up, checking the quality of her dress, evaluating her jewelry. Dad did his usual firm handshake while looking her up and down in a way that made Sarah unconsciously adjust her posture. "So, you're the famous Sarah," Mom said, holding Sarah at arm's length like she was examining a piece of art. "All good things, I hope?" Sarah replied with a nervous laugh. "Oh, we'll see," Mom said with what I thought was a playful smile, but now I realize was something much more calculating. Brad wasn't there yet, which was typical. He's always fashionably late to everything because he thinks it makes him more interesting, more in demand. He once showed up 2 hours late to Christmas dinner because he wanted to make an entrance and ensure that everyone was already gathered so he could be the center of attention. The first hour went okay. My aunt and uncle were there, my cousin Katie, a few family friends that Mom had insisted on inviting. Everyone was polite, asking Sarah about her work, complimenting her dress, doing the normal meeting the family dance. Sarah started relaxing, laughing at my uncle's terrible dad jokes, helping my mom in the kitchen even though Mom insisted she didn't need help. I was actually starting to think everything was going to be fine. Sarah was charming everyone, telling funny stories about her design work, asking thoughtful questions about my family members' lives. My aunt was already talking about having her over for Sunday dinner, and my uncle was discussing his small business and asking if Sarah had any insights about improving his company's website. Then Brad showed up. He walked in like he was making a grand entrance at a movie premiere, wearing this expensive-looking navy suit that I immediately knew he couldn't afford. The fabric was too nice, the cut too perfect, the whole ensemble too coordinated for someone who'd been borrowing money for car insurance. Later, I found out he'd borrowed it from a friend who worked at a high-end menswear store and would have to return it the next day before anyone noticed it was missing. He had this huge bouquet of flowers, some exotic arrangement that must have cost at least $100, and a bottle of champagne with a label I recognized as being ridiculously expensive. He made a big show of congratulating us, spinning Sarah around like they were old friends, kissing her cheek with practiced charm. "Future sister-in-law," he announced to the room as if he was the host of the party instead of just another guest. "Matthew, you lucky bastard. She's even more beautiful than you said." The energy in the room completely shifted. Suddenly, everyone was focused on Brad, asking him about his latest project, laughing at his stories, gravitating toward his magnetic personality. Sarah noticed it too. I could see her watching how my parents lit up when he started talking about his consulting business, how they hung on every word when he described his recent breakthrough with a potential client. Brad launched into this elaborate story about landing a consulting contract with a tech startup, describing meetings with venture capitalists and discussions about scaling business models. He used all the right buzzwords, painted a picture of himself as this savvy entrepreneur who was finally hitting his stride. My parents were beaming, nodding along, occasionally glancing at me with expressions that clearly said, "See, we told you Brad would make something of himself." What made it worse was how believable he sounded. Brad has this gift for absorbing just enough information about any industry to sound knowledgeable for about 15 minutes. He'd obviously spent time researching tech terminology, learning the vocabulary, understanding enough to construct a convincing narrative. If you didn't know his history, if you hadn't watched him fail at dozens of similar ventures, you might actually believe he'd turned a corner. But I knew better. I knew that 3 weeks earlier Brad had called me asking to borrow money for his car insurance. I knew that his LinkedIn profile still listed his last job as ending 8 months ago. I knew that the office space he'd mentioned renting was actually a shared workspace that he paid for by the day, and only when he had client meetings to impress people. About halfway through dinner, Mom stood up to make a toast. I thought she was going to say something nice about Sarah and me, maybe share a cute story about our engagement or talk about how happy she was to welcome Sarah into the family. Instead, she launched into this speech about how proud she was of both her sons, but especially Brad, who had such an entrepreneurial spirit and was always chasing his dreams. "Matthew has always been so practical," she said, looking directly at Sarah with what I now realize was a calculated expression. Steady job, steady income, steady personality. Some women appreciate that kind of security. The way she emphasized some women made it sound like settling for less than you deserved. Sarah squeezed my hand under the table. I could feel her tension, the way her body went rigid, but she kept smiling politely. I should have said something right then, should have redirected the conversation or called out the passive-aggressive tone, but I was too shocked by Mom's obvious slight. "But Brad," Mom continued, gesturing toward my brother like she was presenting a prize at an auction, "Brad has that special something, that spark that makes things happen. He's not content to just follow instructions or stick to a routine. He creates opportunities, builds relationships, makes things happen through sheer force of personality." The comparison was clear, and it was devastating. In front of my fiancée at our engagement party, my mother was basically saying that I was the consolation prize while Brad was the real catch. After dinner, people started mingling in the living room. The house has this open floor plan that flows from the dining room into a living area with a fireplace and built-in bookcases that Mom had professionally staged with leather-bound books she's never read and decorative objects chosen by an interior designer. I was talking to my cousin Katie about her new job at a marketing firm when I heard Mom talking to Sarah by the kitchen island. At first, it sounded like normal conversation, the kind of getting-to-know-you chat that happens at family gatherings. But then I heard my name mentioned in a tone that made my stomach clench, and I tuned in more carefully. "Matthew is a sweet boy," Mom was saying, her voice carrying that condescending tone she uses when she wants to sound caring while delivering criticism. "He's always been a bit limited in his ambitions. He's comfortable with routine, never really pushes himself to grow or take risks." I walked over, pretending I needed another drink from the bar setup they had on the kitchen counter. "What are we talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light even though my heart was starting to race. "Oh, just getting to know Sarah better," Mom said with that fake sweet smile she uses when she's about to say something awful. "I was telling her how different you and Brad are personality-wise." Sarah looked uncomfortable, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. "Mrs. Peterson, Matthew is incredibly ambitious. You should see how dedicated he is to his work, how much his colleagues respect him. He just got promoted to lead a whole team." Mom laughed, actually laughed, like Sarah had said something naive and amusing. "Well, of course you'd see it that way, honey. Love makes us see the best in people. But there's a difference between being good at following instructions and being a real leader. Someone who can inspire others and create opportunities from nothing. Brad has that natural charisma, that ability to walk into any room and immediately become the most interesting person there." I felt my face getting hot, that familiar combination of embarrassment and anger that I'd been dealing with my entire life. "Mom, what are you doing?" "I'm just being honest, sweetheart," she replied, patting my arm like I was a child who didn't understand adult conversations. "Sarah seems like a lovely girl, very accomplished in her own right. I just want to make sure she understands what she's getting into, what kind of life she can expect." That's when Brad appeared at my shoulder, because of course he did. He had this uncanny ability to show up whenever there was drama brewing, like he could sense when he might become the center of attention. "What's everyone talking about over here?" he asked, flashing that smile that had been getting him out of trouble his whole life. "I was just telling Sarah about some of your recent successes," Mom said, her whole demeanor changing like someone had flipped a switch. She started gushing about this consulting contract Brad had supposedly landed worth $50,000. She went into detail about the client meetings, the project timeline, the potential for expansion into a full-service consulting firm. I knew it was complete nonsense, because Brad had asked me for money to pay his car insurance just 2 weeks earlier. If he had a $50,000 contract, he wouldn't need to borrow $300 from his little brother. But Sarah didn't know that. She was nodding politely, trying to look impressed, trying to be supportive of my family even though she could clearly sense the undercurrents of dysfunction. Sarah was asking the right questions, showing interest in Brad's supposed business, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. She was trying to reconcile the Brad my mother was describing, this successful entrepreneur with major contracts and big plans, with the guy who'd shown up an hour late and was already on his third beer despite it only being 7 o'clock. Then Mom dropped the bomb that changed everything. "You know, Sarah," she said, putting her hand on Sarah's arm like they were best friends sharing a secret, "I have to be honest with you as a woman who's been married for 35 years. Matthew is, well, he's a good man, but he's not really the ambitious type.
He's content to coast through life, never really challenge himself or reach for something bigger."
My stomach dropped. I couldn't believe she was saying this to my fiancée at our engagement party in front of guests while holding a glass of wine and smiling like she was giving helpful advice. But she wasn't done. "Now, Brad," she continued, gesturing toward my brother like she was presenting a prize at an auction. "Brad has that spark, that drive to really make something of himself. He's got big plans, big dreams. He's the kind of man who could give a woman like you the life you deserve, full of excitement and adventure and unlimited potential." The room went quiet. Not completely quiet, but that awkward quiet where you can tell people are pretending not to listen while absolutely listening to every word. Conversations died mid-sentence, wine glasses paused halfway to lips, and everyone within earshot was suddenly very interested in our little group by the kitchen island. Sarah stared at my mother for a long moment, then looked at me, then back at Mom. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled, like someone trying very hard not to explode. "Are you suggesting I'm engaged to the wrong brother?" she asked. Mom laughed like Sarah had made a hilarious joke, throwing her head back and clapping her hands together. Oh, I'm not suggesting anything specific, honey. I'm just saying that if you ever realize you want more excitement in your life, more adventure, more potential for growth and success. She looked meaningfully at Brad, who was standing there with a smug smile like he was in on some private joke. Well, there are always options. I felt something snap inside me. 29 years of being the disappointment's son, of watching my parents worship Brad while treating me like an afterthought, of having my achievements minimized and my character criticized, all came rushing to the surface in one overwhelming wave of rage and hurt and determination. You want to talk about potential, Mom? I said, my voice louder than I intended, carrying across the room and cutting through the pretense that this was still a polite family gathering. Let's talk about potential. The entire room was paying attention now. Dad started walking over from where he'd been discussing golf with my uncle, probably sensing trouble brewing. Brad's smile faltered just slightly, like he was beginning to realize this might not go the way he'd planned. Brad, I said, turning to face my brother directly, looking him in the eye for the first time all evening. Why don't you tell Sarah about your consulting business? Tell her about this $50,000 contract you supposedly landed. Brad's face went pale, his confident expression cracking like a mask that suddenly didn't fit properly. Matthew, don't. Don't what? Don't tell the truth? I was on a roll now, 29 years of resentment pouring out like water through a broken dam. Tell her about how you're actually living in Mom and Dad's basement because you got evicted from your apartment 3 months ago for not paying rent. Mom gasped dramatically, pressing her hand to her chest like I'd physically struck her. Matthew, stop this right now. This is neither the time nor the place. Tell her about the $12,000 you owe in credit card debt, I continued, my voice getting stronger with each revelation. Tell her about how you got fired from your last job for showing up drunk to a client meeting. Tell her about the DUI you got last year that Mom and Dad covered up by hiring an expensive lawyer and telling everyone it was just a misunderstanding. The room was completely silent now. Even the music seemed to have stopped, though that might have been my imagination. My aunt was staring at her wine glass like it contained the secrets of the universe. My uncle was studying the ceiling with intense concentration. My cousin Katie was openly recording everything on her phone because of course she was. Brad tried to salvage the situation with the charm that had always worked before. Matthew, you're being dramatic. Everyone goes through rough patches, especially when they're building something new. Rough patches? I laughed and it came out harsh and bitter. Brad, you're 31 years old. You've never paid rent on time in your life. You borrowed $500 from me 6 months ago and never paid it back. You've been between jobs more than you've been employed. What exactly is the potential Mom's talking about? Sarah was staring at me, then at Brad, then at my mother, her expression cycling through confusion, realization, and something that looked like anger on my behalf. Mom tried to do damage control, switching to her crisis management voice. Every family has private matters that don't need to be aired in public, especially not at a celebration. Private matters? I was really getting going now, fueled by years of suppressed frustration and the look of betrayal on Sarah's face. You just spent 10 minutes trying to convince my fiancée that she's engaged to the wrong brother. You want to talk about private matters in public? Let's go all the way. I turned to address the whole room, making sure everyone could hear me clearly. Since Mom thinks Sarah should know what she's getting into, let me give everyone the full picture of Brad's potential. Dad finally reached us, his face red with embarrassment and anger. Son, maybe we should take this conversation somewhere private. Work this out as a family. No, Dad. I'm done protecting Brad's reputation. I'm done pretending he's something he's not just to keep the peace. I looked directly at Sarah, wanting her to hear this from me, wanting her to understand exactly what kind of family dynamics she was marrying into. Brad moved back in with our parents 4 months ago, not temporarily while he figured things out, not as part of some master plan. He's been living there because he has literally nowhere else to go and no money to change that situation. The consulting business Mom's bragging about. It's Brad doing handyman work for people he meets at bars. Getting paid under the table because his credit is so bad he can't get a legitimate business license or open a proper business bank account. Brad was trying to interrupt, making hand gestures and shaking his head. But I kept going. The expensive suit he's wearing, borrowed from a friend, has to be returned tomorrow. The champagne he brought tonight, I saw the receipt in Mom's purse when she was looking for her lipstick. She paid for it. The car he drove here in? That's Dad's car because his got repossessed last month when he couldn't make the payments. Mom was crying now, but I couldn't stop. 29 years of being the second choice, the disappointment, the one who didn't live up to Brad's supposed potential. All coming out in one explosive revelation. And that DUI, Mom, the one you told everyone was just a misunderstanding, that the breathalyzer was probably faulty. Brad hit a parked car while drunk at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. That's not a mistake or bad luck. That's a serious problem that you've been enabling and covering up. The room was dead silent. My aunt was openly staring now. My uncle was nodding slightly like he was finally hearing truths he'd suspected for years. My cousin Katie was still recording, probably already planning her social media posts. Sarah finally spoke. Her voice was quiet but steady, cutting through the tension like a knife. Is this true? Brad tried his charm offensive one more time, flashing that smile and spreading his hands in a gesture of innocent explanation. Sarah, you have to understand. I've been going through a difficult period, but I'm turning my life around. I have opportunities, real plans this time. Is it true? Sarah repeated, looking directly at him with an expression I'd never seen before, steely and uncompromising. Brad's shoulders slumped. For once in his life, caught in front of an audience with nowhere to hide, he couldn't talk his way out of consequences. Some of it is exaggerated. Which parts? Sarah asked, and the question hung in the air like a challenge. The silence stretched out uncomfortably. Finally, Dad cleared his throat and tried to regain control of the situation. Maybe we should all sit down and discuss this calmly, like adults, without airing our family business in front of guests. No, Sarah said, surprising everyone, including me, with the firmness in her voice. I think I've heard enough. She turned to face my mother directly. And when she spoke, her voice was clear and strong. Mrs. Peterson, I want to make something very clear to you and everyone else in this room. I'm not engaged to Matthew because he's safe or practical or because I'm settling for security over excitement. She gestured toward Brad with obvious disdain. I'm engaged to him because he's honest, reliable, and treats me like an equal partner. He's never lied to me about who he is or what he does. He's never asked me for money. He shows up when he says he will. He keeps his promises. He supports my career and celebrates my successes. Mom tried to interrupt, but Sarah held up her hand like a stop sign. I'm not finished. Your other son might be charming, but charm without substance isn't attractive to me. I don't want someone who lives off his parents at 31. I don't want someone who lies about his accomplishments or borrows money he never intends to pay back. I definitely don't want someone who drives drunk and puts other people's lives at risk. She turned to me, and her voice got softer, but no less determined. Matthew, I'm sorry your family doesn't see how incredible you are, how much you've accomplished, how hard you've worked to build a good life. But I do every single day. Then she looked back at my mother with ice in her voice. And as for your suggestion that I might want someone with more potential, I think you're confusing potential with fantasy. Matthew has already achieved more at 29 than Brad has at 31. And he did it without anyone else paying his bills or cleaning up his mistakes. The whole room was staring at us. My cousin was definitely still recording. My uncle was nodding more obviously now, like he was thinking about his own family dynamics. Mom tried one more time to regain control. Sarah, you don't understand the full situation, the complexities of family relationships. I understand enough, Sarah said firmly. I understand that you just spent our engagement party trying to convince me to leave your son for his brother. I understand that you think so little of Matthew that you'd rather promote someone who's living in your basement. And I understand that this family has some serious problems that Matthew and I don't need to be part of. She took my hand and I could feel her strength flowing into me. We're leaving. As we walked toward the door, I heard Brad call after us, his voice cracking with desperation. Matthew, come on, don't be like this, we're brothers. Family fights sometimes, but we work it out. I turned around one more time, looking at him standing there in his borrowed suit, holding his expensive champagne that our mother had paid for, still trying to charm his way out of consequences. Brothers support each other, Brad. Brothers don't let their parents trash each other at engagement parties. Brothers don't stand there smiling while their mother tries to steal their sibling's fiancée. I wasn't trying to steal, Brad started, but I cut him off. You were smiling and nodding while Mom pitched you as the better option. You were enjoying every second of it. That's not just trying to steal, that's actively participating in the theft. We left, just walked out of my engagement party, got in Sarah's car, and drove away while my entire extended family watched from the windows. The next few days were a complete blur. My phone was constantly buzzing with calls and texts from family members. Mom was alternating between angry messages about how I'd embarrassed the family and humiliated her in front of guests and tearful voicemails about how she just wanted what was best for me and couldn't understand why I was being so cruel. Dad left several messages trying to be the peacemaker, saying Mom had just had too much wine and didn't mean what she said. Fat family was more important than pride, that we needed to work this out like adults. He kept emphasizing how much they loved both their sons and just wanted everyone to be happy. Brad sent a series of texts that started with apologies and ended with accusations about how I'd always been jealous of him, how I'd been waiting for years to tear him down, how I'd ruined his relationships with the family out of petty resentment. But the message that really got to me was from my uncle. He called 2 days later, and his voice was quiet and serious. "Matthew, I've been wanting to say this for years but never had the courage. Your mother has always had blinders on when it comes to Brad. What you did took guts. Your father is proud of you, even if he can't say it right now because he's trying to keep the peace. But that girl of yours is special. You hang on to her." It turns out my cousin Katie posted the video on TikTok, and it went viral in our extended family circle. Suddenly, aunts and cousins who had watched years of Brad worship were reaching out to tell me they'd always thought the favoritism was unfair, that they'd noticed the double standards, that they'd been hoping someone would finally call it out. My grandmother, Dad's mom, called me the next week. She's 83 and doesn't usually get involved in family drama, but her voice was firm and clear. "I never liked how your mother treated you boys differently. That girl of yours has good sense and backbone. You marry her and don't let anyone talk you out of it." The real bombshell came a week later when my uncle called with news from the family grapevine. Apparently, Brad's consulting business was even worse than I'd revealed at the party. He'd been taking deposits from people for work he never completed. There were 3 potential lawsuits in the works from clients who'd paid him for web design projects that were never delivered. And Mom and Dad were going to have to dip into their retirement savings to keep him out of serious legal trouble. The final straw was when I got a call from Mom 3 weeks later. She was crying, her voice shaky and desperate. "Matthew, honey, I need to ask you a favor. Could you maybe lend us some money just temporarily until we get this situation with Brad sorted out?" The audacity was incredible. After spending our engagement party trying to convince my fiancée I wasn't good enough, after promoting my brother as a better option, after years of treating me like the disappointment son, she wanted to borrow money from my steady, practical, boring job to clean up after her golden child. "How much?" I asked, though I already knew I was going to say no. 15,000, maybe 20 to be safe. We'll pay you back as soon as Brad gets this new contract he's working on." I said no. For the first time in my life, I told my mother no without apologizing or explaining or offering alternatives. "But he's your brother," she said, crying harder into the phone. "And I'm your son," I replied. "But that didn't matter when you were trying to trade me in for a newer model at my own engagement party." That was 3 weeks ago. Sarah and I have been planning our wedding, looking at venues, tasting cakes, doing all the normal couple stuff. We decided together not to invite my parents. Sarah suggested it gently, saying we could always have a separate celebration later if we wanted to.